Well, that's the provocative title of the book proffered by our guest right now, Sidney Powell, who is a federal appeals attorney. Sidney, we thank you very much for making time to join us. And that is a provocative title, Licensed to Lie. Tell us how you arrived at the title and what your book talks about.
The book talks about egregious prosecutorial misconduct in several high-profile cases in the last decade. The title just kind of came to me when I realized the bar associations denied the grievances we filed against these prosecutors, even though they violated a very important ethical rule and a constitutional duty at the same time. They hid evidence that showed defendants were innocent while they sent them to prison. And I just realized when the bar associations did nothing about the grievances and the courts did nothing about the grievances, they had effectively licensed these prosecutors to lie. Meanwhile, they had been promoted to positions like Chief White House Counsel, General Counsel, Deputy Director of the FBI, and Acting Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice.
So, under any administration, there can be a temptation to have prosecutorial conduct that is over the top. If I'm not mistaken, Sidney, I believe you may have been involved with the late Senator Ted Stevens and some of exposing and dealing with the prosecutorial overreach in that particular example. But what's troubling to me as you outline this is the inaction by bar associations to deal with this or even comment on it. Has the bar or the bar associations, have they just been hopelessly politicized in favor of the left?
I think the bar associations are hopelessly politicized in favor of lawyers. I think there's a tendency by any group to circle the wagons and protect its own, which is self-defeating. I mean, that makes it harder for every good lawyer to do his or her job. And anytime we have bad apples in a barrel, they need to be weeded out, not spread.
So with that in mind, and I want to get back to your long-term ideas for how to deal with this within the Justice Department, but Sidney, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up what has just transpired in the nation's high court, a 5-4 decision in favor of the Hobby Lobby position dealing with contraceptives offered by a private employer through an insurance plan. Have you heard about this case today, and what strikes you hearing this 5-4 decision?
I just saw a news flash about it as I was on the way into the studio, so I have not had a chance to read the decision. I can't say that I'm completely surprised. I think it's one of those cases that could have gone either way depending on the interests of the justices on the court. And
again, that's a case that attorneys like yourself will be reading and poring over to take a look at the specifics. We'll come back now to the here and now and to some of the headlines that are out there, even as we take a look at the headline that appears on our parent website, Newsmax.com. Let me bring it back to another subject, Sidney, in today's headlines, and that is what is going on with the IRS and the Justice Department being incredibly patient. I mean, what is it? These emails from Lois Lerner and 6 other employees under suspicion just go poof. And then you have the commissioner of the IRS going into a congressional committee, or at least to 2 of them, unyielding in his type of combative stance. Your take on what has happened as a lawyer? Yeah, the arrogance of that is I'm just interested first on your take on that and then the implications for the Department of Justice.
Well, the implications for the department are serious because they should be solving this problem themselves and finding the emails, if not starting their own investigation. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't think there's a person in the country that believes that those emails just all suddenly went missing when they pertain to the most crucial time and information relevant to the investigation. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I wrote an article in the New York Observer, it's at observer.com, entitled Meet Emmett Sullivan, because the judge who's assigned to the IRS case is none other than Judge Emmett Sullivan of D.C., who ordered the special prosecutor to investigate the Department of Justice and the prosecutors in the Ted Stevens case. I did not work on the defense on that case, but the case is covered and Judge Sullivan is discussed at length in the book License to Lie, and the article on the Observer website, which has gone viral in the last 24 to 48 hours. It's at observer.com, along with 3 other articles I wrote about President Obama and his muses, and Eric Holder protecting corrupt prosecutors in the Department of Justice, and the war on Wall Street with Leslie Caldwell, who destroyed Arthur Anderson, now being in charge of the criminal division of the Department of Justice.
So, suffice it to say that those in charge of the Department of Justice now, as we can see across the administration, are committed activists from the left, and that deals with the activities in which they engage and the activities which they choose not to pursue. Now, you mentioned Attorney General Holder. Very curious about what you believe his fate will be. He has been held in contempt. A United States Congressman from Arizona by the name of Paul Gosar wants to see the Attorney General impeached. But it does not appear that Congress has a stomach for that kind of action. Do you believe Holder will be able to continue on unchecked and, by extension, be able to protect the president and others in the administration from some of these difficult questions?
It's hard to say. There's going to be mounting evidence, I believe, of increasing corruption in the Department of Justice. The Project on Government Oversight came out recently with a report identifying over 400 instances of prosecutorial misconduct that was either intentional or reckless in the department. Over 60 some, I believe, were confirmed during Holder's tenure by department lawyers and by the Office of Professional Responsibility itself. To get that office to do anything to identify prosecutorial misconduct is a significant accomplishment. So for them to have recognized it, it has to be bad. The public has called on, and that organization has called on Holder to release the names of the prosecutors, and he refuses to do that, which personally I think is an outrage. Those prosecutors should be identified and they should be fired. He also has failed to identify the cases in which the prosecutorial misconduct occurred. There's no telling what those defendants have suffered. I have no doubt but that there are innocent people in our prisons everywhere.
As we take a look at this, there's so many different examples, different instances we could bring up. I'm going to bring it full circle back to the curious case of the missing emails. Now, I know attorneys are advocates for those whom they represent, but Lois Lerner's attorney, William Taylor III, has I guess we would call an interesting perspective of what's going on with his client's case. He says, and I quote, "This is a so-called congressional investigation with no pretense of objectivity or bipartisanship. Critics of Ms. Lerner and the IRS seize indiscriminately on small pieces of fact they claim to prove scandal." When you hear that kind of rhetorical flourish, does that have any basis in reality?
It makes me cough and want to say a 2-syllable word that's not allowed on camera.
Those of us who remember Animal House of a certain age, we think we know where you're headed with that in a quasi-judicial setting. Just one last question. Darrell Issa is not a lawyer. He's never played one on TV, but he's chairman of Government Reform and Oversight. He says the testimony of IRS Chief John Koskinen is one step away from perjury. We had the headline up from our parent website, Newsmax.com. In your opinion, is Koskinen on thin ice? Because as we know, lying before a congressional committee, you can go to jail for that just like perjury.
That's exactly right. It basically would be perjury. He is on very thin ice, and I think Judge Emmett Sullivan on July 10, I've told everybody to mark their calendars for July 10 because he is calling IRS in for a hearing on why they did not disclose to him that the emails were missing in the case filed by Judicial Watch.
And that is why we will circle July 10th, and we hope you can make time in your schedule to come back and join us to talk about this issue as we continue to monitor what is going on with the IRS, the missing emails, and as the book's title reads, A License to Lie. Sidney Powell, attorney, we thank you for your time and your insights, and we hope you can come back and see us the second week in July, okay?
Thank you, JD. I'll be glad to do that.
Good deal, Sidney. Thanks so much. So there's Sidney's take on it. She knows whereof she speaks. She's an attorney, and she says there are serious problems. What do you think? Why don't you tweet us at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum, and we'll continue after this time out.